when a little girl stepped up to a group of leather-clad bikers holding a pink bicycle. No one expected what came next. Her voice barely above a whisper, she made an offer that stopped them cold. What these rough-looking strangers did in response would expose a powerful man's darkest secret and prove that justice doesn't always wear a suit and tie. The Harley engines rumbled to silence one by one, their chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun. Miller kicked his stand down and stretched his back, feeling every mile of the highway in his spine. Behind him, Jeff, Fred, and Butler were already off their bikes, pulling off gloves and shaking out road-weary limbs. 20 minutes, Miller announced, scanning the quiet suburban street. Manicured lawns, white picket fences, the kind of neighborhood where their presence would raise eyebrows. He could already see curtains twitching in windows. Fred lit a cigarette. Friendly place. Always are, Butler muttered, leaning against his bike. They'd stopped in dozens of towns like this one. Clean, quiet, suspicious of anything that didn't fit the mold. Miller didn't care. They needed a break before the final stretch home, and this spot by the playground was as good as any. That's when she appeared. A little girl, no more than 7, emerged from behind a cluster of oak trees. She wore a stained yellow dress, too big for her frame, and her feet were bare against the hot pavement. But what caught Miller's attention was what she dragged behind her. A pink bicycle with streamers hanging from the handlebars, one training wheel missing. She walked straight toward them, her small face set with a determination that seemed too old for her years. Jeff noticed her first. Mill? The girl stopped 3 feet from Miller's bike. Up close, he could see the dirt smudged across her cheeks, the tangles in her dark hair, the way her dress hung loose over protruding collarbones. But her eyes, brown and enormous, held his without flinching. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you want to buy my bike?" The 4 men exchanged glances. Miller crouched down slowly, making himself less imposing. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Ariel." She swallowed hard. "It's a good bike. The streamers are real pretty, and it only needs 1 training wheel fixed. I can take any price." "Any price?" Miller's chest tightened. "Please." The word cracked coming out. "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." The playground sounds, distant laughter, a squeaking swing, seemed to fade away. Fred's cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. Jeff stood frozen, his usual easy smile gone. Butler pushed off his bike and moved closer. Miller kept his voice gentle. "Where's your mommy, Ariel?" The little girl turned and pointed across the street. Under a sprawling maple tree, barely visible in the shade, was a figure slumped against the trunk. A woman, thin to the point of skeletal, her head resting on her knees. "She's tired," Ariel said, turning back to them. Her chin trembled, but she kept talking. "She says we'll be okay, but I know she's hungry. I heard her stomach making noises last night. So I thought maybe if I sold my bike." Miller felt the weight shift in his chest. Years of keeping distance from other people's problems suddenly felt like cowardice. He looked at his brothers. Butler's jaw was clenched. Jeff had removed his sunglasses, his eyes wet. Fred had dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "How much do you want for it?" Miller asked. "Whatever you can give." Ariel's voice was barely audible now. "Even $1 would help. Mommy could buy something small." Miller reached for his wallet, but he couldn't stop staring at this child. This brave, terrified little girl trying to save her mother the only way she knew how. She was selling the last piece of childhood she had left, and she didn't even know it. "Tell you what," he said, pulling out bills. "You keep the bike. This is a gift." Ariel's eyes widened as he pressed the money into her small hands. "But I didn't sell you anything. You gave me something more important." Miller stood, his knees protesting. "You reminded me why we stop." He looked at the figure under the tree again. The woman hadn't moved, hadn't even lifted her head at the sound of motorcycle engines or her daughter's voice. Stay here with my friends, Miller said to Ariel. I'm going to talk to your mommy. As he crossed the street, each step felt heavier than the last. He'd seen enough of the world to know this wouldn't end with handing over cash. It would demand action. Miller's shadow fell across the woman before his voice did. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge his presence. He could see her shoulders rising and falling with shallow breaths, each one seeming to cost her something. Ma'am. He kept his distance, not wanting to startle her. My name's Miller. Your daughter just tried to sell me her bicycle. That got a reaction. Her head lifted slowly, revealing a face that might have been beautiful once. Now it was all sharp angles and hollow cheeks, her skin pale except for the dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked at him with a mixture of shame and defiance. I told her not to do that. Her voice was hoarse, cracked from disuse or dehydration. Maybe both. I'm sorry she bothered you. She didn't bother us. Miller lowered himself to sit on the grass a few feet away, giving her space. She's brave. Takes after her mother, I'd guess. The woman's laugh was bitter. Brave, right? She tried to sit up straighter and failed, her body trembling with the effort. I'm Kayla, and I'm not brave. I'm just out of options. Across the street, he could see Jeff crouching down to talk with Ariel, pulling candy from his saddlebag. The girl was smiling for the first time, a glimpse of the child she should be. Tell me what happened, Miller said simply. Kayla shook her head. You don't want to hear this. I wouldn't have asked if I didn't. Maybe it was his tone, or maybe she was just too tired to pretend anymore. Either way, she started talking. The story spilled out in fragments, each piece adding weight to the picture forming in Miller's mind. She'd worked at Vaughn Industries for nearly a decade as an administrative assistant. Never missed a day until Ariel got sick, the kind of sick that lands you in a hospital, not home with soup. 2 days. That's all Kayla had missed. 2 days of holding her feverish daughter, watching monitors beep in a hospital room, praying to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore. I called every day, Kayla said, her hands twisting in her lap. I sent medical documentation. I did everything right. But when she returned, Richard Vaughn himself had summoned her. Not HR, him personally. She'd thought maybe he wanted to check on Ariel, show the compassion his company website preached about. Instead, he'd been cold, clinical. He said I'd proven myself unreliable. Kayla's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I begged him. I actually got on my knees and begged. Told him about my husband dying 2 years ago, about Ariel needing stability, about having nowhere else to go. She closed her eyes. He looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. Said business required difficult decisions. Had security walk me out while my coworkers pretended not to see. Miller's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice level. No severance? Nothing. And without a reference, without being able to explain that gap in employment, she gestured helplessly at herself, at the tree, at everything that had led to this moment. I've applied everywhere, dozens of places, lost count after a while. The desperation shows now, I guess. They can smell it on me. The medical bills had devoured their savings. The life insurance from Ariel's father had already gone to funeral costs and catching up on rent they'd fallen behind on during his illness. Kayla had sold everything worth selling: jewelry, electronics, furniture. The apartment was nearly empty now. We're 2 weeks from eviction, she continued. The food bank helps, but their delivery didn't come yesterday. Or today. And I can't. Her voice cracked completely. I can't watch my daughter go hungry because some man in a glass tower decided my child's life didn't matter. She looked away, toward Ariel across the street. I used to read her bedtime stories every night. Now I lie awake calculating which bills to ignore, which utilities we can live without. That's what he took from us, not just money. He took our normal. Miller looked at this woman, this mother who'd worked herself to exhaustion, played by every rule, and still ended up broken under a tree while her daughter sold toys for food. The injustice sat heavy in Miller's stomach, turning everything sour. He pulled out his wallet again, removed everything inside, and placed it in Kayla's lap. This isn't charity. It's a loan until you're back on your feet. I can't pay you back. Then pay it forward someday. He stood, brushing grass from his jeans. But right now, I need you to do something for me. Kayla looked up at him, confused. I need Richard Vaughn's address. Office address. Her eyes widened. Why? What are you going to do? Miller didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked across the street where his brothers stood with Ariel, their bikes gleaming like metal steeds waiting for riders. Sometimes money isn't enough. Sometimes the rot needs to be cut out at the root. Please don't do anything violent, Kayla whispered. I can't have that on my conscience. We're not violent men, Kayla. Miller's smile was cold and hard. We're just really good at making people understand consequences. Miller walked back across the street with Richard Vaughn's business address burned into his memory. Kayla had given it reluctantly, still afraid of what might happen, but too exhausted to fight anymore. His brothers saw his face and knew immediately that the stop had become something more. We riding? Butler asked simply. Miller's single nod was the only answer they needed. Jeff pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen. Within seconds, Richard Vaughn's face filled the display, a professional headshot from the Vaughn Industries website. Silver hair styled to perfection, a suit worth more than Kayla's car ever was, and a smile that belonged on billboards. Behind him in the photo, glass and steel gleamed like a monument to success. Look at this, Jeff said, his voice tight. He scrolled through the site. Community Leadership Award. Business Ethics Recognition. There's a whole section about his charitable foundation. Fred leaned in to look. Guy who fires a single mother for saving her dying kid has a charity? PR, Butler said flatly. It's always PR with these types. Miller took the phone, studying Vaughn's face. He'd seen that expression before, the comfortable arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Someone who'd learned that money and lawyers could smooth over any rough edges, silence any complaints. Downtown, Jeff continued, taking his phone back. Vaughn Tower, 23rd floor executive suite. Building has valet parking, marble lobby, probably security. Good. Miller bent down to Ariel, who was finishing the candy Jeff had given her. The color had returned slightly to her cheeks. Sweetheart, can I borrow something from you? She looked up at him with those enormous eyes. What? That sign you made. The one about selling your bike. Ariel glanced at her mother, who nodded weakly from across the street. The girl ran to retrieve it from where she'd left it propped against the maple tree. A piece of cardboard torn from a moving box, the words written in thick black marker with a child's unsteady hand. Please buy my bike, Mommy needs food. She brought it back to Miller, holding it carefully like something precious. Are you going to help sell it? Something like that. He took the sign gently. We're going to make sure your mommy gets what she needs. The four men mounted their bikes. Miller folded the cardboard carefully and secured it inside his leather jacket. The engines roared to life simultaneously, that familiar thunder that had announced their arrival now signaling their departure with purpose. As they pulled away from the curb, Miller caught a glimpse of Kayla in his mirror. She'd managed to stand, one arm wrapped around Ariel, watching them leave. Hope had returned to her eyes, the dangerous kind that hurts worse when it breaks. The ride downtown showed the city's real face. Block by block, the streets went from desperate to comfortable, as if poverty were something you could just drive away from. They passed through neighborhoods that looked like Kayla's, worn down, struggling, invisible. Then the buildings began to change. Taller, cleaner. The people on the sidewalks wore suits and carried briefcases, their shoes worth more than a week's groceries. Vaughn Tower rose above it all, a monument of glass and ambition. its reflective surface threw back the sky, making it seem untouchable, separate from the dirt and struggle of the streets below. Miller led them into the executive parking garage, their bikes rumbling between rows of Mercedes and BMWs. A security guard started toward them, but something about the way they moved, purposeful, unified, unafraid, made him reach for his radio instead. They parked near the elevator entrance. Butler removed his sunglasses, tucking them carefully into his pocket. Jeff cracked his knuckles. Fred straightened his jacket. Small rituals, old habits from a different kind of confrontation. The lobby was everything Jeff had implied. Polished marble floors, abstract art on the walls, a fountain in the center that probably cost more than Kayla's entire year of rent. A receptionist sat behind a curved desk that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. Her professional smile flickered when she saw them approach. For large men in leather and denim, road dust still on their boots, walking through her pristine corporate sanctuary. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Her voice was steady, but her hand moved subtly toward her phone. "We're here to see Richard Vaughn," Miller said. "Not a question, not a request. Do you have an appointment? Tell him it's about Kayla Morrison." The name meant nothing to her, just another forgotten casualty in Vaughn's rise to the 23rd floor. But she picked up her phone, spoke in low tones, listened, then looked back at them with barely concealed surprise. "Mr. Vaughn will see you. 23rd floor, Suite 2301. In the elevator, none of them spoke. The cardboard sign crinkled slightly against Miller's chest. Through the glass walls, they watched the city shrink below them, all those lives reduced to toy-sized problems from up here. Fred watched the numbers climb. "You ever wonder if we're making it worse? Going in there like this?" Miller didn't turn from the glass. "Worse than a kid selling her bike for food? No, I don't wonder." The doors opened onto executive luxury. Thick carpets, mahogany panels, soft lighting designed to make power look civilized. A nervous assistant met them at reception. "Mr. Vaughn is expecting you. Please, this way." As they followed her down the hall, Miller felt his brother's close ranks behind him. No words needed. They'd been riding together for 15 years, and some conversations happened in silence. The assistant opened double doors to reveal a corner office that seemed designed to humble anyone who entered. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city spreading out like a kingdom. And there, behind a desk the size of a dining table, sat Richard Vaughn, older than his photo, grayer, but wearing the same expression of comfortable superiority. Miller pulled out the cardboard sign and walked forward. It was time for a man in a glass tower to learn what his decisions looked like from the ground. Richard Vaughn stood as they entered, confusion flickering across his polished features. He'd agreed to the meeting out of curiosity more than anything else. The name Kayla Morrison had stirred something vague in his memory, though he couldn't quite place it. But these men, these bikers in his pristine office, were not what he'd expected. "Gentlemen, I'm not sure what—" Miller placed the cardboard sign on Vaughn's desk, right between a crystal paperweight and a framed photo of Vaughn with the mayor. The crude marker letters screamed against the mahogany surface. "Please buy my bike. Mommy needs food." Vaughn stared at it, his practiced corporate composure wavering. "What is this?" "That's what desperation looks like, Mr. Vaughn." Miller's voice was quiet, controlled. "A 7-year-old girl made that sign this afternoon. She was trying to sell her bicycle to feed her mother. I don't understand what this has to do with Kayla Morrison." Jeff stepped forward. "Worked for you for 8 years. Perfect record. You fired her 3 months ago because she stayed home with her daughter who had pneumonia." The name clicked now. Vaughn's face shifted. He didn't remember her face. Just the decision he'd made, filed away and forgotten. "That was a personnel matter. I don't discuss. Her daughter tried to sell us her bike for $1. Fred's voice cut through the corporate doublespeak. "Any dollar. Because her mother hasn't eaten in 2 days." Vaughn's hand moved toward his phone. I think you should leave before I call security. Butler moved to the window, looking down at the city below. That'd be interesting. 4 guys in leather jackets escorted out of Vaughn Tower. I bet the news crews downstairs would love that story. He turned back. Especially when we explain why we're here. Are you threatening me? Vaughn's voice rose, authority reasserting itself. No. Miller pulled a chair around and sat down. Vaughn's office, his rules, none of it mattered now. We're giving you something you didn't give Kayla Morrison. A choice. The other 3 spread out naturally, not blocking exits but creating a presence that filled the enormous office. Vaughn remained standing, trapped behind his own desk. Kayla begged you, Miller continued, got on her knees and begged you to keep her job. She told you about her dead husband, about raising a child alone, about having nowhere else to go. Do you remember what you said to her? Vaughn's jaw tightened. Business requires difficult decisions. Difficult for who? Jeff picked up the Crystal Award Business Ethics 2024. You gave a speech accepting this. Something about corporate responsibility and community values. I employ over 300 people. And you destroyed one of them because she chose her dying child over your convenience. Miller leaned forward. That little girl selling her bike? She's the cost of your difficult decision. The mother starving under a tree? That's your business ethics. Vaughn tried a different approach, his voice smoothing into rehearsed sympathy. Look, I understand this seems harsh, but there are policies, procedures. If I made exceptions for everyone, she didn't want an exception. Butler's voice was like gravel. She wanted basic human decency. I can't help what happened after she left. That's not my responsibility. You made it your responsibility when you fired her without cause, without severance, without a reference. Fred set the award back down harder than necessary. You made it personal when you had security walk her out like a criminal. Vaughn's face reddened. I don't have to justify my business decisions to a bunch of... Choose your next words carefully, Miller said softly. The threat in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Vaughn swallowed, realization dawning that his usual tools. He understood what it felt like when the rules didn't protect you. What do you want? Money? Is this extortion? We don't want your money. Miller stood, walking to the window where Butler stood. We want you to understand something. Right now, your name means success, leadership, ethics. But we could change that. One phone call to every news outlet in this city. One social media post with that sign and Kayla's story. How long before Vaughn Industries becomes synonymous with cruelty? You can't prove. Jeff held up his phone, showing a photo he'd taken. Kayla under the tree, Ariel holding her bike, the visible desperation of it all. Proof isn't hard to find when you're not hiding behind lawyers. Vaughn dropped into his chair. He'd spent his whole career avoiding moments like this. He looked at the cardboard sign, at these 4 men who'd invaded his sanctuary, at the city beyond his windows where people like Kayla disappeared every day. What do you want from me? His voice had lost its edge. Miller returned to the desk, placing both hands on its surface, leaning in until Vaughn had to meet his eyes. We want you to make it right. Not for publicity, not for tax write-offs. Actually, right. How? Kayla needs rent money, food, a job with a company that won't throw her away. And she's not the only one, is she? Miller's eyes bored into him. How many other Kaylas are out there because you made difficult decisions? Vaughn said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. You've got a choice, Miller said, straightening. You can make this right quietly, genuinely, or we can make sure everyone knows what your awards and charity really cost. We're not asking for miracles, just asking you to remember what it's like to need something you can't buy. They left the sign on his desk and walked out, leaving Vaughn alone with his crystal awards and the crude letters of a desperate child's plea. 2 days later, food appeared on Kayla's doorstep, real food, not handouts. Her rent was paid through an anonymous donor. A competing firm called with a job offer, citing a glowing personal recommendation from Richard Vaughn himself. And across the city, other former employees of Vaughn Industries began receiving similar calls, similar help, as a man in a glass tower learned that wealth without humanity was just another form of poverty. When Miller and his brothers returned to check on Kayla and Ariel a week later, they found them transformed. Not just fed and housed, but alive again. Ariel ran to hug Miller, her pink bike gleaming beside her, all its pieces finally whole. As the sun set orange and gold, they shared a meal together on Kayla's small porch, burgers and fries, nothing fancy, but tasting like victory. Miller looked at his brothers across the table, Jeff with his easy laugh back in place, Butler actually smiling, Fred telling Ariel an exaggerated story about a breakdown in Nevada. They'd come here for a rest stop. They'd leave having reminded themselves why they rode in the first place. Not to escape the world, but to find the parts of it still worth fighting for. The bikers had proven something the world too often forgot: that justice doesn't always wear a badge, and heroes don't always look the part. Sometimes they just know when to stop, when to listen, and when to ride toward the darkness instead of away from it. Sometimes the people society fears most are the ones who understand justice best. What would you do if you witnessed this kind of desperation? Would you stop and help, or would you look away? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if the story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that real strength is measured in compassion, not power. Don't forget to subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. See you in the next video.